He was merely a 70-year-old veteran, confined to a wheelchair resting beneath a magnolia. No offense, no menace. Yet 6 officers encircled him, ridiculed him, crushed his cap and publicly shamed him in broad daylight. Unbeknownst to them, an observer was present. And one trembling hand clutching a phone would alter everything. This isn't just a tale, it's an awakening. Remain with us. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness transcends a mere narrative. It stands as a profound testament to the quiet strength and relentless pursuit of fairness in overlooked corners. If this is your initial visit, I extend a warm invitation to share your viewing location in the comments below. And if narratives such as this resonate with you, challenge your perceptions, or provoke thought, consider subscribing and activating the bell icon. We amplify deserving voices daily. Thank you for your presence. Now let's delve into the story. The morning air in Charleston carried the sweet essence of magnolia and moss, a breeze that hinted at ancient tales and quiet dignity. Walter Green, 70, propelled his wheelchair along the path of Magnolia Park, a ritual he'd observed every morning for the past decade. Dressed in a meticulously pressed tan vest, his faded Navy veteran's cap gently positioned on his head, Walter was unhurried. He never was. He had long since grasped that the world moved swiftly enough without his pursuit. He moved to his own rhythm, now a gentle jazz tempo of serene grace, memory, and dignity. It was 8:04 a.m. Sunlight filtered through the trees, resembling stained glass illumination from an ancient church window. The park was nearly deserted, save for a few joggers and the murmur of pigeons near the fountain. Walter paused by the bench beneath the magnolia. He closed his eyes, tilting his face skyward. The warmth evoked memories of his mother's touch, blessing him on the porch before school. But then the world shifted. 3 police cruisers approached silently, too silently. The sharp sound of car doors slamming was the sole warning. Within moments, 6 officers surrounded him. All Caucasian, all youthful, their uniforms pristine, their expressions inscrutable. Walter slowly opened his eyes, bewildered. He hadn't seen a siren, heard a warning, or summoned aid. "What's your business here?" one barked. Walter blinked. "Just enjoying the morning. This is my daily walk." "Well, roll." He chuckled, a gentle attempt to diffuse the tension, but it failed. "Got ID on you?" another inquired. Walter calmly reached into his chair's side pouch and presented his wallet. The officer didn't even glance at it. Instead, he tossed it to another cop who opened it and scoffed. Walter Green, 70 years old. He read aloud as if it were a punchline. "What are you doing all the way out here by yourself, Mr. Green, causing trouble?" Walter's heart quickened, but his voice remained steady. "This is my neighborhood. I've lived here longer than you've been alive." The tallest officer leaned in, his voice low. "Yeah. Well, looks like trouble's got a new wheelchair." They laughed. It was the laughter that pierced deeper than anything. Not the suspicion, not even their blockade of every exit, but the laughter. That bitter sound that conveyed they saw not a man, but an aged body in a chair, brown skin in the wrong place, an effortless target. Walter didn't argue. He'd weathered worse. He understood the protection silence offered. But when an officer snatched his veteran's hat from his head, scrutinized it, then crushed it under his boot, Walter flinched. He whispered, "That was my father's. He served in Korea." The officer offered a thin smile. "Guess you're not the only one who lost something." Walter's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. His vision blurred with rising tears he refused to shed. He wouldn't grant them that. He would not. Another officer pulled out a phone and began recording. Not to document misconduct, but to mock him. He joked about scouting old men for bingo gang turf. They cackled again. The sound reverberated off the trees like slaps. A jogger passed, slowed, stared, then accelerated, feigning ignorance. A mother with a stroller froze. Her baby began to cry. She pulled the canopy down and circled widely around the scene. And then, from a corner near the food cart, a boy no older than 17 stood motionless. His name was Malik Dawson. His hands trembled as he raised his phone. He didn't know what to do, but he knew this was wrong. Walter sat surrounded, disgraced, dehumanized beneath the flag he once saluted. Eventually the officers retreated. No arrest, no citation, no apology. They departed as swiftly as they arrived, but before they did, one leaned in close and said, Next time don't give us a reason to stop. Stay in your lane, old man. And just like that they vanished into the quiet morning. Walter remained still, frozen, hollow, his crushed cap in his lap, his knuckles white on the armrests of his chair, his breath shallow but not broken. Because even as his pride had been bruised, something else stirred. He heard the whisper of jazz in his mind, a melody his mother used to hum. He recalled the applause at his final school recital before retirement. He remembered the first time he saw the ocean after returning from war. And for a brief, luminous second he remembered who he was. Walter Green, Navy veteran, father of 3, teacher to hundreds, neighbor to all, the man they tried to erase. But what they didn't know was this. Someone saw, someone filmed, and someone cared. The video would be uploaded that night. It would begin as a flicker, then ignite across the internet like dry grass beneath lightning. People would recognize the park. They would recognize the uniform. They would recognize that expression, one too many had witnessed before, but were too afraid to confront. And Walter, once unseen, would become impossible to disregard. What commenced with laughter would culminate in accountability. And the world would finally inquire, whom do we protect? And whom do we permit to be humiliated simply because we can? But that was yet to unfold. For now the old man sat beneath the magnolia tree, the morning sun warm on his skin, dignity resurfacing, like a tide refusing to be contained. Not this time. Never again. Malik Dawson hadn't intended to be a witness. That morning he was simply restocking the snack cart his uncle allowed him to operate near the park entrance. He was 17, lanky and soft-spoken, with a keen intellect rarely given space in his boisterous world. Malik was the type of kid most people overlooked. Quiet in class, excessively polite, invisible to authority. But his grandmother always said, just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Silence is where truth learns to breathe. That morning, as he unpacked bottles of lemonade and meticulously arranged them beside the chips, he caught sight of something that made his chest tighten. A group of officers had surrounded someone near the old magnolia tree. He knew the man. Everyone in the neighborhood did. Mr. Walter Green. The man in the wheelchair with jazz in his heart, who distributed hard candies to passing children and always offered a good morning, whether you responded or not. Malik saw one of the officers knock the veteran's cap to the ground, then step on it. Time slowed. His throat went dry. The rational voice in his head urged him to stay low, to remain silent, to do what everyone else had done. Look away, pretend it wasn't happening. He was just a teenager. What could he possibly do? But something deeper surged within him. A kind of knowing. The kind passed down through dinner table stories when adults thought you weren't listening. The kind etched in the eyes of every black elder who had ever walked this country with an iron spine and a raw heart. He pulled out his phone. His hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped it. He said nothing. Didn't dare breathe too loudly. He simply hit record. He captured everything. The mocking voices, the laughter, the silent faces of the onlookers who chose safety over truth. He saw Mr. Green clutch his chair as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Malik continued filming until the officers departed, until the air felt breathable again, until the world stopped spinning. Then he stopped the video and stood there, frozen. What now? Back home he paced for hours. His mother was already at her second shift. His little sister played on the floor, too young to comprehend what he had witnessed. Malik skipped lunch, didn't turn on the TV. He watched the video repeatedly, his stomach tightening with each viewing. That night he sent it to his cousin Jaden, a journalism student at Howard University. The reply came within minutes. This is serious, Malik. This is really serious. You need to talk to someone. The next day Malik walked to Walter Green's home. It took him nearly an hour to summon the courage to knock. When the door creaked open, Mr. Green sat in the same wheelchair, his face etched with fatigue. But his eyes still held something fierce, something unyielding. I filmed it, Malik said, holding up his phone with both hands as if presenting a fragile truth. Walter said nothing. He simply nodded slowly once. Come in. Inside the small home filled with vinyl records, faded photographs and the scent of lemon balm tea, Malik played the video. Walter sat still. The screen showed him being ridiculed, violated, treated as insignificant. And yet here it was, proof undeniable, immortalized. He remained silent for a long while. Finally, he reached out, gently resting a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You did something most grown men won't," he said, his voice low but firm. "You didn't look away." That evening, Malik posted the video anonymously. He sought no attention, no fame. He simply wanted the world to see what it so often refused to see. He wrote only 10 words beneath the post. "His name is Walter Green. This is what happened." Within hours, it spread. By morning, it had surpassed 100,000 views. Hashtags emerged. Hashtag Justice for Walter. Hashtag Magnolia Park. Hashtag We See. Local news picked it up. Civil rights organizations shared it. Then came the journalists, the interviews, people from Atlanta and New York, even overseas, requesting statements. But Malik remained quiet. He let the video speak for itself. He watched the world grapple with the truth. He watched people, some for the first time, perceive an old man not as a stereotype, not as a case number, but as someone real, someone wronged, someone who had once served his country and now sat broken under the weight of its indifference. One post caught Malik's eye. A comment from a woman named Ava Lane, a retired teacher. "I used to walk past Mr. Green every Sunday after church. I never spoke to him. I regret that now. He always smiled and I thought that was enough. I see him now." That night, Malik returned to Walter's house. This time he wasn't nervous. He carried something with him. A photo he'd taken of the moment the officers walked away, leaving Walter sitting alone. He had printed it, framed it, and written in black marker at the bottom, "I didn't look away." Walter smiled for the first time in days. "You changed the story," he said. "Maybe just a chapter, but that's how the whole book starts to shift." They sat in the living room for hours, discussing music, the war, and what it means to stay when fleeing feels safer. Malik listened, absorbing every word like scripture. He left that night with more than a story. He left with purpose. Because what Walter didn't know, and what the officers could never predict, was that one boy with a phone and a conscience would initiate something far greater than justice. He would ignite a movement. And the boy who didn't look away, he made the whole world open its eyes. Walter Green's home was more than just a house. It was a memory preserved in wood and brick, embraced by jasmine vines and the echo of old jazz melodies. Nestled in the heart of Birmingham, mere blocks from the civil rights district, it had endured protests, storms, and now a new tempest of injustice. To the city it was a house on a quiet street. To Walter it was a legacy. A parcel of earth, his wife once said, that would outlive them both. And etched into the foundation, invisible to the world, was something sacred. His name. That name, Green, had always held significance. Even if the world refused to pronounce it correctly or acknowledge it fully, even if the mail was addressed to W. Green or occupant, or sometimes simply left blank, Walter's name was fully present on the deed. He had fought to acquire that home, fought harder to retain it during lean years, and paid it off one quiet morning with trembling hands as he signed the final check. But now that name carried a new burden. After Malik's video surfaced, the city attempted to suppress it with statements. "Pending investigation, respect our process, no comment at this time." The mayor's office issued a brief memo. The police chief promised a review. But Walter recognized the rhythm of delay. He'd witnessed it before. Justice in America wasn't blind. It was merely conveniently nearsighted when it came to men like him. Then came the letter. A formal, cold notice stating that the property at 224 Ashland Avenue, his home, was flagged for nuisance review. Someone had filed a claim citing increased neighborhood unrest. No name, no neighbor, just the word of an anonymous source and a bureaucratic signature. It was legalistic, designed to intimidate. And for a moment it succeeded. Walter sat in his chair, hands stiff on the folded letter, the pressure behind his eyes rising like a silent tide. "They want you gone," said Malik, reading the notice aloud. "They're trying to erase more than your story." But Walter's voice was clear, steady. "They're coming for my name." And that name wasn't just ink on a page. It was a promise. It was 48 years of marriage, 37 years of property taxes, and the slow reconstruction of a man who had lost friends in the war and nearly lost himself afterward. That home had sustained him through grief, joy, protest, and prayer. It was the house where his wife Georgia passed, and where her garden still bloomed every spring with marigolds and lavender. It was the last thing he still owned that hadn't been taken or violated. And now they were circling it, hiding behind legal frameworks and procedural smoke screens. But Malik wasn't the only one watching. One night as Walter sat by his record player, allowing Coltrane to play long into the darkness, a knock came at the door. It was Ava Lane, the retired teacher who had written the comment online. She wasn't alone. With her were 3 neighbors all holding clipboards. "We've started a petition," Ava said without fanfare. "You're not fighting this alone." Walter said nothing. He simply nodded and allowed them inside. By the end of the week, over 2,000 signatures had been collected. Not just from Birmingham but from New Orleans, Detroit, Oakland, and even as far as Canada. People wrote letters, some handwritten, some typed in shaky English, all conveying the same message. "We see you. We know what this is and we will not look away." Walter held one letter close. It came from a woman in Jackson, Mississippi. "My grandfather was put out of his home in 1964 for trying to register black voters. He died believing his name didn't matter. Yours does. Hold the line." That phrase, "hold the line," became a rallying cry. Civil rights attorneys offered pro bono assistance. Journalists investigated the city's so-called nuisance property claims and uncovered a pattern predominantly filed against elderly black homeowners with high-value land. It wasn't random. It was a quiet tactic, a systemic whisper intended to displace without attracting headlines. But now there were headlines. And then came a moment no one anticipated. At a town hall forum, packed with cameras and concerned citizens, Malik stepped to the microphone. He spoke not with rehearsed fire or political polish. He spoke like a boy transformed. "I'm not here to talk about a video," he said. "I'm here to talk about a name. Walter Green is more than a victim. He's my neighbor. He's a veteran. He owns his home. And this city is trying to make him disappear. You can't do that. Not anymore." The room fell silent. Then slowly applause began. Walter watched the clip on TV later that night. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pity but from recognition. He saw the reflection of every man who had ever dared to live freely in a country that demanded permission for his existence. He saw Georgia smiling. He saw Malik maturing into something steady and strong. And most of all, he saw the deed still tucked in the drawer beneath the old family Bible. That paper wasn't just legal proof. It was a line drawn in the earth. Walter Green would not be moved. He would not be erased. And as long as that house stood, so would his name. The courtroom air was heavy, thick with the unspoken truth that had long lingered over cities like Birmingham. Justice, when delayed, often arrived blind, not in its symbolism but in its selective vision. And Walter Green, seated in his wheelchair near the front row, was no longer merely a man striving to be seen. He had become the lens through which the country viewed itself. Outside the courthouse, the air crackled with anticipation. Protesters lined the streets, not in anger but in unity. "Justice for Walter" signs swayed beneath the morning sun, echoing chants born not of noise but of resolve. College students, elders, veterans, working mothers, all gathered because one act of disrespect had stripped away the illusion of a truth too long tolerated. Inside, the trial was commencing. At its center stood Officer Craig Denton, flanked by his union attorney in a cold wall of silence. His badge, gleaming in the courtroom lights, bore the number 4261. To the city it was just another badge. But to Walter, it was the embodiment of every humiliation he'd endured that morning in Marston Park. The one where he had sat peacefully reading Braille scripture before being surrounded by officers who questioned his right to exist in public space. They hadn't seen a citizen. They hadn't seen a veteran. They hadn't even seen a human being. They saw a threat cloaked in skin, and Denton, by all accounts, hadn't even known Walter's name until after the footage aired. Now the footage played again, projected above the judge's bench. The gasps in the courtroom weren't dramatic. They were weary, familiar. The image of Denton towering over a 70-year-old man in a wheelchair, snatching the Bible from his lap, then pushing the chair backward while calling for backup, was seared into the public's memory. But this time it was being scrutinized as evidence. "Do you recall Mr. Green threatening you in any way?" the prosecutor inquired. Denton shifted. He was uncooperative. He was reading. He didn't respond when I asked what he was doing there. "He's legally blind," the prosecutor replied. "He likely didn't even know you were addressing him from behind." The silence that followed was stifling. In the gallery, Malik leaned forward, fists clenched. He remembered the way Walter's voice cracked when he recounted how the officers laughed as they questioned whether he belonged in a neighborhood like this. That wasn't policing. That was profiling. Ava Lane took the stand next. Her voice, once reserved for classrooms and poetry readings, now carried a righteous clarity. They weren't afraid of him, she said. They were dismissive, cruel. I know what it looks like when someone exercises authority with empathy. That was not it. The defense attempted to twist her words. Couldn't it have been a misunderstanding? She didn't flinch. No. Misunderstandings don't snap Bibles in half. Every word added weight. But it wasn't until Malik testified that the courtroom atmosphere shifted. He stood awkwardly at first. I'm just a kid with a phone, he said. I didn't know what to do, but I knew what I saw. And what I saw was a man treated like he didn't matter. His voice cracked, not from fear but from a long-suppressed fury. I saw a badge that didn't recognize the life in front of it. The judge didn't bang a gavel. She just stared long and hard at the defendant. Denton's lawyer tried to pivot. Officer Denton acted within policy, but policy, as it turned out, was precisely the problem. Because when it came to officers like Denton, the badge too often came with blinders. Not just to race but to humanity. Training protocols, city ordinances, reasonable suspicion. These were the frameworks used to justify harm. And Walter, with all his dignity, had simply been the latest brick in a wall built long ago. Back in his home, after the court adjourned for the day, Walter sat in silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the kind that precedes a clearing storm. The trial was still ongoing, the outcome uncertain. But for the first time in years, people were listening. Not just hearing, but listening. He reached toward the table and picked up a letter that had arrived earlier that week. It was from a retired police officer in Ohio. The man's handwriting was rough, but his words were clear. I wore the badge for 30 years, and what I saw in that video broke my heart. A badge should protect, not humiliate. I'm sorry we failed you. Walter read it twice. Then he whispered, maybe the badge can still mean something. Later that night, the city council announced an emergency review of their public safety engagement protocols. A fancy phrase perhaps, but change had to begin somewhere. Walter knew it wouldn't erase what had happened. But if the system could blink just once, then maybe it could begin to see. In the days that followed, Malik helped organize a panel of community voices. Former officers, lawyers, civil rights advocates, and citizens like Ava, who had witnessed injustice and named it. They didn't seek revenge. They sought reform. Walter wasn't always present, but his spirit permeated every testimony, every pause, every breath. The badge, it turned out, had no eyes. But now it had a mirror, and it could no longer look away because Walter Green, once just a man on a bench, had become the face of what the badge should protect, and a reminder of what happens when it doesn't. The sun had begun its gentle descent behind the rooftops of Birmingham, casting a warm amber glow across the small square in the heart of the city. There, beneath the oldest magnolia tree in Marston Park, a tree whose gnarled roots had quietly outlived generations, sat a newly installed wooden bench, simple, unadorned, yet profoundly meaningful. Etched onto a small bronze plaque affixed to its backrest were the words, "For Walter Green. May we always choose to see." Walter himself sat just beside the bench in his wheelchair, a light wool blanket draped across his knees. He was quiet, not out of frailty but reverence. Around him a small crowd had gathered. People from the neighborhood, city officials, former classmates of his sons, strangers who had become allies. Reporters maintained a respectful distance, their cameras lowered. This wasn't a press event. It was a reckoning transformed into remembrance. Ava Lane stood to speak, her voice clear but resonant. This bench isn't just for Walter. It's for every person who's ever been asked, "What are you doing here?" simply because of the color of their skin. It's for every soul who's had to prove their right to peace, to space, to sit without suspicion. She turned toward Walter and smiled. And it's for the man who reminded us all what dignity looks like even when no one's looking. Malik followed, more nervous but no less sincere. He brought no notes. He simply spoke from the place within him that had changed. I used to think that courage looked like big speeches and loud fights, he said. But now I know it can also look like sitting still, holding your ground, not raising your voice when you have every right to scream. Mr. Green didn't just endure that morning in the park. He taught us what it means to be unshaken. Walter remained silent for a while. He simply let the words settle around him like petals. Then slowly, with effort and pride, he wheeled himself forward and placed his hand on the bench. His fingers brushed over the bronze plaque, tracing his own name. His voice was soft, but no one had trouble hearing him. "This isn't about a bench," he said. "It's about the world we're willing to sit in and the one we're willing to build." He paused, the weight of the moment evident in his breathing. "I didn't ask to become anyone's symbol. I just wanted to read my Bible in peace. But if what happened to me lit a spark, then let this be the flame we tend together. Let this bench be where children ask hard questions and parents give honest answers. Let it be where silence gets broken, where fear gets named, where change takes root." No one applauded. Not immediately. The silence that followed was thick with emotion, the kind that doesn't demand a response but commands reflection. A magnolia petal drifted down, landing quietly on the bench beside his hand. And then, almost in unison, people began to approach. One by one, they placed items at the foot of the bench. Flowers, letters, candles, folded notes that carried words like, "I saw," and "I'm sorry," and "thank you." A young boy, no older than 9, stepped forward with his mother and said softly, "Mr. Green, I want to be like you when I grow up." Walter smiled and held out his hand. "Then just keep looking," he said. "Even when others don't." As dusk settled and the crowd thinned, the bench remained still, strong, unyielding. It would be there tomorrow and the day after. It would bear the weight of those who came to remember, to reckon, to rest. And beneath the magnolia tree, it would whisper the name Walter Green, not as a warning but as a vow, to see, to care, to never walk past again. In the heart of Birmingham, beneath a quiet magnolia tree, the story of Walter Green was etched into memory, not through grand monuments or loud declarations, but through the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who refused to be erased. Walter Green was never destined to become a headline. At 70 years old, he was simply a man seeking tranquility in a world that often offered none. Confined to a wheelchair, enveloped in the rhythm of his daily routines, Walter's life should have unfolded like a gentle melody, undisturbed, unnoticed, and unchallenged. But the morning they laughed was the morning everything changed. It began with a group of uniformed officers. Men who perceived not a veteran, not a neighbor, not a father, but a problem. A disruption. A body in a space they believed he didn't belong. Their cruelty wasn't overt. It was subtle, insidious. Words escalated to taunts. Taunts to threats, until his wheelchair became a stage for degradation. But what those officers didn't know was that they weren't alone. Across the square, a teenager named Malik stood behind a sandwich shop window. He wasn't an activist. He wasn't striving for bravery. He was simply a boy with a phone and an intuition that what he was witnessing needed to be seen. And with one trembling thumb he hit record. The video would travel far beyond Birmingham. It permeated timelines, ignited conversations, and roused people from apathy. But more importantly, it unveiled a truth we often choose to ignore. That injustice rarely conceals itself. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it stands in plain sight. And too often it is disregarded. As the story spread, so did support. Ava Lane, a local store manager who almost turned away, stepped forward to speak. Community leaders found their voice. Lawyers offered their assistance. And slowly, justice began to stir, not with sirens but with solidarity. Through it all, Walter remained steadfast. He didn't lash out. He didn't demand attention. He simply lived with quiet defiance. He reminded us that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like showing up again. Sometimes it sounds like the tremor in a voice that refuses to break. Eventually, his name, once forgotten, once dismissed, was etched into the brass of a bench. Not as a victim but as a witness, not of violence but of resilience. And here is where the lesson resides. Walter's story teaches us that silence is never neutral. Choosing to remain quiet when someone is suffering is not an act of peace. It is participation in their erasure. The world doesn't need more bystanders. It needs more people willing to see, to speak, and to stand up. It also teaches us that age, disability, and race are never reasons to be dismissed. They are reasons to listen more closely, to honor more deeply, to fight more fiercely for the dignity of all people, especially those society has too often pushed to the margins. So, what can we integrate into our lives? We can look up, pay attention, notice the people who are rendered invisible, speak when it's uncomfortable, record when it matters. Support those who are targeted not because it's popular but because it's right. And above all, remember that small actions possess immense power. One video, one voice, one bench, Each became part of a movement that made history. If this story moved you, if it challenged you or reminded you of what still needs to be accomplished, then we invite you to be part of something greater. Subscribe to our channel, share this video, and help us continue telling stories that matter. Your support gives voice to those who are too often silenced. It fuels the work of truth-telling, and it reminds every Walter Green out there, you are not invisible and you are not alone. Let's keep walking toward justice, one story, one voice, and one bench at a time. Thank you for watching.